The puppy hit the kitchen floor without a sound. No whimper, no cry, just wait. The kind of stillness that doesn't belong to anything living. Nix didn't move. He stood at the counter, dish towel still in his hand, water still dripping from his fingers, staring at the small black shape the dog had just set down between its front paws. The overhead light flickered once. Outside, rain cracked against the estate windows like something trying to get in. The storm had been building for 3 hours. Nobody had asked Nix if he was okay being alone in this wing. Nobody ever did. The dog, big, black, barrel-chested, with amber eyes that caught every shift of light, sat perfectly still. It didn't look at the puppy. It looked at Nix. That was the first wrong thing. Nix set the dish towel down slow. Real slow. The way you move when your brain hasn't decided yet whether to run. His eyes dropped to the puppy on the floor. Tiny. Couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Black fur, same shade as the dog's. For paws curled inward. Chest not moving. He swallowed. What did you? He didn't finish the sentence. He crouched, knees hitting cold tile. His hand hovered 2 inches above the puppy's side. Not touching, just hovering. Because some part of him already knew, and knowing meant he had to do something, and he didn't know what to do. Not with this. Not with any of this. He was staff. He cleaned. He cooked. He kept his head down and his mouth shut, and he did not get involved with anything that happened inside these walls. And yet, the dog nudged his wrist with its nose. Not aggressive. Not threatening. A nudge. The way a person taps your shoulder when they need you to pay attention. Nix jerked back. His pulse jumped hard in his throat. The dog held his gaze and didn't move. Didn't blink. Just kept watching him with those amber eyes like it had already decided something about him that he hadn't agreed to yet. He looked back at the puppy. No blood. That was the second wrong thing. If the dog had heard it, if something had gone wrong out there in the storm, there would be blood. There would be damage. There would be something that explained this. But the puppy looked untouched. Completely, impossibly untouched. Like it had simply stopped. Mid-breath, mid-heartbeat, mid-living. Hi viewers. Have you ever had something choose you when you didn't even know you needed to be chosen? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know. Nix reached out again. Slower this time. His fingers pressed gently against the puppy's ribs. Nothing. Then so faint he almost missed it, warmth. Not the warmth of a body already gone cold. The other kind, the stubborn kind, the kind that means something is still fighting even when nothing on the outside shows it. He pulled his hand back, pressed it flat against his own chest like he needed to check that his heart was still running right. The kitchen light flickered again, and this time it stayed dim. That sick yellowish dim that made everything look like it was happening at the bottom of a lake. The dog hadn't moved, hadn't looked away. Nix opened his mouth, closed it. He had about 14 questions and no good place to start with any of them. Who did this dog belong to? He knew that. Everyone on the estate knew that. What it was doing in the kitchen at 1 in the morning, he did not know. Why it had walked through what had to be a locked corridor, past 6 other staff members, past rooms full of people with actual authority, and dropped something lifeless at the feet of the lowest-ranked person in this entire building. He had no answer for that. The puppy didn't smell like death. And that made it worse. Because if it smelled like death, he could step back. He could go get someone. He could make this someone else's problem, the way everything in this house was always someone else's problem. The way Nix had spent the last 11 months making sure nothing here was ever his problem. But it smelled like rain, like wet grass, like something that had been outside in the storm and brought back in, like it had been carried, protected. The dog pressed its nose to Nix's knee, and this time it didn't pull back. Nix's breath came out uneven. He looked at the puppy, then at the dog. Then at the dark doorway across the kitchen, the one that led to the rest of the estate, to the long marble hallway, to rooms he wasn't supposed to enter and conversations he wasn't supposed to hear. He looked at the doorway for a long time, because somewhere in the back of his mind, underneath all the confusion and the fear and the why is this happening to me, he heard something, a creak, slow, deliberate, like the door had been standing open for a while, and whoever was behind it had just decided to move. The door didn't slam. That would have been easier to handle. A slam means surprise, means someone stumbled on something they didn't expect. What happened instead was worse. The door swung open at a steady pace, like the person behind it had been deciding for some time exactly how fast they wanted to enter, and had chosen the speed on purpose. Darien Core didn't walk into a room. He arrived in it. 6'2", dark clothes. No rush in his body, none at all, which was somehow the most frightening thing about him. Men who had nothing to lose moved fast. Men who already owned everything, they moved like this, like time itself had agreed to wait. He stopped just inside the doorway. Didn't speak. Didn't look at the puppy on the floor right away. He looked at Nix. Nix's knees were still on the tile. His hand was still pressed to his own chest. He was crouched in the middle of the kitchen floor in his uniform, damp from the humidity, with a lifeless puppy 6 inches from his left knee and the estate's most dangerous dog watching him like he was the only person in the world worth watching. And now Darien Core was watching him too. Nix stood up. Too fast. His hip caught the counter edge and he bit the inside of his cheek and said nothing. Darien still hadn't spoken. That was the thing about him that everyone on staff agreed on, in whispers, in hallways, in 30-second conversations that ended the moment anyone else walked by. It wasn't his reputation that got to you first. It was the silence. The way he used it. Like most men used words. Deliberate. Waited. And the dog Caesar, Nix had heard the name exactly twice since starting here, did not move toward Darien. That hit Nix somewhere in the chest before his brain caught up with why. Caesar was Darien Core's dog. Had been for years, from what the older staff said. Trained specifically. Expensive. Responsive to one person. That was the whole point of a dog like that. One person. Caesar was not looking at that person. Darien's eyes dropped to the puppy finally. 1 second. 2. Then back up to Nix. Why did it bring it to you? Not a question. The words came out flat and even like he was reading something off a page, except the page didn't exist and the question had no good answer and Nix was very aware that his hands were shaking. I don't know, Nix said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. He wasn't sure whether to be relieved about that or more afraid. Darien stepped closer. Not aggressive. Just closer. The kind of closer that meant he wanted a better look. At the puppy, maybe, or at the dog, or at Nix's face. And Nix couldn't tell which one it was, and that uncertainty sat in his stomach like a stone dropped in still water. Caesar turned his head. Watched Darien approach. Then turned back to Nix. Something shifted in Darien's expression. So fast Nix almost missed it. Not surprise, something colder than surprise. Something that looked like calculation dressed up as curiosity. He crouched. Same way Nix had. Smooth. Controlled. He held 2 fingers out toward Caesar. Caesar sniffed them. And looked away. Darien straightened up slowly. His eyes moved across Nix's face like he was reading something written there that Nix hadn't meant to leave visible. Nix held still. He had learned early, before this job, before this estate, before any of this, that the worst thing you could do in front of a man like Darien Core was flinch. So he didn't flinch. His legs were shaking under his uniform and he absolutely did not flinch. Darien looked at him for a long moment, then down at the puppy, then at Caesar, who had pressed one heavy paw against the tile directly beside the small limp body, steady and certain, like a claim. Darien said 2 words. Quiet. No edge in them. No heat. Just wait. Then save it. Nobody moved for a full second. Then Caesar looked at Nyx. Just looked at him. Patient. Like this had already been decided, and Nyx was the last one in the room to know it. Nyx's mouth went dry. I'm not. He stopped. Started again. I don't know how to do that. Darien said nothing. 3 men had appeared in the doorway behind him at some point. Security, from the look of them, the kind of men who didn't need to announce themselves because their size did it for them. None of them spoke either. They just stood there, and the kitchen suddenly felt half the size it was before. Every single eye in the room was on Nyx. He dropped back to his knees. The tile was cold through his uniform. The puppy was right there, that tiny black body, that unbearable stillness. No blood, no wound he could see, just nothing, like something had pressed pause on a life and walked off with the remote. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of its neck. Warmth, still there, so faint. His brain went sharp in a way it hadn't in a long time. Not calm sharp, the kind of sharp you get when everything narrows down to one thing and every other thought drops away. He'd seen this before. Not a puppy. Something else. Something a long time ago. A cold morning and someone who'd stopped breathing, and the only other person there had been him, and he'd just done something. Because nothing else was an option. He tilted the puppy's head back. Gently, careful with the neck. Checked the airway by instinct, 2 fingers parting the tiny jaw. Nothing blocking it. He put one palm flat over the puppy's chest. The other cupped under it, supporting. He pressed. Light. Barely anything. This was not a person, the ribs were paper thin, too much pressure, and it wouldn't matter anyway. 1, 2, 3. Stopped. Watched. Nothing. Caesar made a sound in his throat. Not a growl. Something lower. Something that felt like impatience. Nyx tried again. Slower this time. More rhythm. He pressed his lips together and counted in his head because counting kept his hands steady, and his hands needed to be steady right now. They needed to be the steadiest they had ever been in his life. One of the security men shifted his weight behind him. Nyx ignored it. 1, 2, 3. Pause. He leaned in, covered the puppy's tiny muzzle with his mouth and breathed in, barely. A whisper of air. Not a full breath. Too small a body for a full breath. Just enough. He pulled back. Watched. The puppy's chest didn't move. His stomach dropped. He tried again. Pressed. Counted. Breathed. The kitchen felt like it was holding itself together by threads, and everyone in it was a thread, and the moment any one of them let go, the whole thing would come apart. Then, the paw moved. Just the left front one. Just a twitch. The smallest possible version of a movement. But it was there. Nyx's hands froze over the puppy's chest. He stared. The paw moved again. A slow curl inward, like something waking up confused about where it was. And then, the whole chest rose. He gasped. One sound. Thin. Wet. Wrong in all the right ways. The sound of air coming back into something that had let it go. Nyx sat back on his heels. He didn't realize he was shaking until he felt his hands against his own thighs, trembling without permission. The puppy's chest fell. Rose again. Fell. Rose. Fell. Rose. He pressed his fist to his mouth. Behind him, not one of the security men made a sound. Caesar lowered his head and touched his nose to the puppy's ear. And Nyx, on his knees on the cold kitchen floor, felt something pass through the room that he didn't have a word for. Not relief. Not triumph. Something heavier and quieter than either of those things. He became aware. Slowly, the way you become aware of heat when you've been standing near a fire without noticing, that Darien core had not moved, had not reacted, had not exhaled with relief or said a single word. He was simply watching. still watching. The same way he'd been watching since the moment he walked in. Like the puppy wasn't the thing he'd been waiting to see. The puppy was breathing. That should have been enough. The room should have relaxed, shoulders dropping, people exhaling. Some version of relief moving through the space the way it does when the worst thing almost happens and then doesn't. That's what normal looks like after a moment like this. Nix had seen normal. He knew what it felt like when a room lets go. This room didn't let go. Darien hadn't moved. Nix became aware of that again, the same way he'd been aware of it before, that slow creeping awareness, like background noise you tune out until it gets too loud to ignore. Darien was standing 3 feet away, and he had not reacted to what just happened. Not with warmth. Not with relief. Not with anything that looked like either. He was watching. Nix got to his feet. Slower this time, joints stiff, the adrenaline leaving his body the way it always left. All at once, taking steadiness with it. He straightened his uniform by instinct. Kept his face even. "It's breathing," Nix said. Quiet. Not a report. Just the truth offered because the silence needed something in it. Darien said nothing. His eyes moved down to the puppy, then back up to Nix. Then, and this was the part that landed wrong, to Caesar. Like he was running a comparison. Like there was a question in the room that didn't have words yet, and he was looking for the answer in the space between 3 living things on a kitchen floor. Caesar sat beside Nix's knee. Had been sitting there the whole time. Through the compressions, through the breathing, through all of it. Never moved away, never startled, never looked to Darien for direction. That was the thing Nix couldn't stop coming back to. Caesar knew exactly where Darien was standing. Dogs always knew. And this one hadn't turned. Hadn't checked. Hadn't done any of the things a dog does when the person it belongs to is in the room. It had stayed beside Nix. Not between Nix and the door. Beside him. Like that was where it was supposed to be. Nix glanced down at it. Caesar looked back up. Amber eyes. Unblinking. Carrying something Nix couldn't name. The same look it had been giving him since the moment it walked into this kitchen. Like it had already written something and it was just waiting for Nix to catch up to the last sentence. One of the security men spoke. Low to another one, and Darien's hand moved once. Just once. Barely a gesture. They went quiet. Darien stepped forward. Crouched again. This time beside the puppy. He looked at it for a long moment without touching it. Then he looked at Caesar. Caesar did not look at him. Something moved through Darien's expression and was gone before Nix could read it. Fast. Controlled. The same way everything about this man seemed controlled. Like every reaction passed through a filter before it got out. He stood back up. Looked at Nix. You weren't afraid of it. Not a compliment. An observation. The same tone he'd used to describe weather. Nix opened his mouth. Closed it. He'd been terrified. His hands had been shaking. His knees were still sore from the tile. If that was what not being afraid looked like, he didn't want to know what afraid would have cost him tonight. But he hadn't stepped back. He'd stayed on the floor with a lifeless puppy and the estate's most dangerous dog and the most feared man in this building. And he had stayed on the floor and done the one thing that needed doing. He didn't know what to call that either. Darien spoke again. For words. Delivered the same way he delivered everything. Without asking, without explaining, like the decision had already been processed and he was just notifying the relevant parties. From now on, he said. A pause. The dog stays with him. 3 days passed. Caesar did not leave. Not when Nix moved from the kitchen to the laundry corridor. Not when he went down to the supply room in the basement, which was cold and narrow and smelled like old stone. Not when he ate his meals at the small table in the east hallway where junior staff sat, the table that was too close to the wall and wobbled on one leg and nobody ever chose it on purpose. Caesar sat beside that table and watched him eat like it was the most important thing happening in the building. Nix tried ignoring it on day one. He was good at ignoring things. 11 months in this estate had made him excellent at it. You look straight ahead. You move with purpose. You don't make eye contact with anything that might require you to have an opinion. Caesar made that impossible. Because Caesar stopped people. Not aggressively. That was the part Nix couldn't explain to himself or anyone else. The dog wasn't growling, wasn't snapping. It simply positioned itself. In doorways, in hallways, between Nix and wherever someone was coming from. Not blocking, just present. Just there. Like a line drawn in the air that everyone could feel and nobody wanted to test. The whispers started by day 2. Nix heard them in pieces. A word here, half a sentence there. The kind of conversation that breaks apart the second the subject of it walks in. He'd been the subject of conversations before. He knew what it felt like. Knew the way eyes moved to him and then moved quickly away. Knew the specific silence that meant everyone had just agreed to stop talking. He didn't ask. Asking was how you got involved. But on the morning of day 3, Roth Calder was leaning against the wall at the end of the main hallway. Nix had seen Roth exactly 6 times since arriving at the estate. 6 times was enough. The man was somewhere in his 40s with the kind of face that had stopped trying to look approachable a long time ago. Senior enforcer. One of the 4 people in this building that even the security men gave a wider path to. Cold eyes. A jaw that always looked like it was working through something unpleasant, and the kind of stillness that wasn't like Darien's stillness at all. Darien was controlled. Roth was waiting. He watched Nix walk down the hallway. Caesar walked beside Nix's left leg. Roth's eyes dropped to the dog. Then back up. Nix slowed. He didn't mean to. His feet made the decision before his head did. Roth pushed off the wall. Easy. Unhurried. You the kitchen boy, Roth said. Not a question. Yes, Nix said. Roth's gaze moved back to Caesar. Stayed there a moment. Something moved in his expression, not quite recognition, not quite confusion. Something in between. That dog, Roth said, has been through 7 years of conditioning. Nix waited. Doesn't break for people. Roth's voice was flat, professional, like he was explaining how a machine worked. Doesn't attach, doesn't choose. He paused. Those are the rules it was built on. Nix held very still. Roth looked at him directly. Animals don't choose wrong, he said, unless someone's manipulating them. The word dropped into the hallway and sat there. Nix didn't look away. He didn't have a response, and he knew it, and Roth knew it too, and the silence between them was the kind that meant someone had just drawn something in the air that wasn't a line. It was a warning. Caesar's head turned toward Roth. Slow, deliberate, and then quietly, deep in the chest, almost too low to hear. A sound came out of Caesar that Nix had never heard before. Not loud, not a bark. Just a low, even growl that started soft and stayed soft and carried every bit of its weight in that softness. Roth's eyes dropped to the dog. For the first time since he'd started talking, something shifted in his face. He looked back at Nix, said nothing else, and walked away. Nix stood in the middle of the hallway. Caesar pressed warm and solid against his left leg and watched him go. His pulse was running hard. Because in 7 years, apparently, that dog had never done that before. Not for anyone. Nix snapped first. Not loud. Not dramatic. The quiet kind of snapping, the kind that happens after 3 days of something pressing on a place you didn't know was already sore. He was in the East Corridor. Late. Most of the staff had cleared out an hour ago. The hallway lights had dropped to their nighttime setting, low, amber, the kind of light that makes everything look older than it is. Nix was carrying a stack of folded linens back to the supply room and Caesar was right there. Right beside his left leg, the same position, the same steady presence it had maintained for 72 hours straight. He stopped walking, just stopped, set the linens down on the hallway bench, turned around and looked at the dog. Caesar looked back. "Stop following me," he said it flat. No anger in it, almost no feeling at all. Which was exactly the problem because he could feel everything underneath the flatness and he needed it to stay underneath. Caesar didn't move. "I mean it." Nix took one step back, put distance between them. His voice stayed even but his hands went into fists at his sides without permission. "Go. Go back to wherever you came from. Wherever you belong." Caesar sat down. The most unbothered sit Nix had ever seen. Something cracked open in his chest. He moved forward fast and put both hands against the dog's chest. Not hard, not hurting, but enough and pushed. "Go." Caesar let himself be pushed, shifted his weight back, and then, slowly, deliberately, with all the patience in the world, stood back up and took one step toward Nix. "No." Nix stepped back again. His voice had a sound in it now that he didn't plan for. Something raw and off-rhythm. "You don't understand what this is. You don't understand what happens to people around men like him when they get noticed. When they get selected. That's not protection. That's a target." Caesar watched him. "I don't want this," Nix said, quieter now, almost to himself. "I didn't ask for any of this. I just needed the job." He turned away, picked up the linens, walked. He didn't look back because if he looked back he would see whether Caesar followed or didn't and he wasn't sure which one of those he could handle right now. He made it to the supply room, set the linens down, closed the door behind him and stood in the dark for a moment with his back against it, just breathing. The hallway outside was quiet. He waited, still quiet. Caesar had listened. For the first time in 3 days, Nix was alone. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and told himself this was right. Told himself this was smart. Told himself that whatever was happening in this estate, whatever game Darien Core was running, whatever calculation Rothkalder was watching for, Nix had just removed himself from the board. Good. That was good. He stood there in the dark supply room for 4 more minutes. Then the alarms went off. The sound came from everywhere at once. Not a fire alarm. Not the soft chime the estate used for curfew shifts. This was the perimeter alarm. A hard, flat sound that punched through walls and didn't apologize for it. And Nix had never heard it before in 11 months. Which meant he didn't know what it meant. Which made it worse. The supply room door swung open. He was already moving. The corridor outside looked different in alarm lighting. The amber strips had cut out, replaced by something colder, white and strobing faintly at the far end. 2 staff members ran past him going the wrong direction, faces tight, not stopping. He heard shouting from somewhere deep in the east wing. Then something else. A sound he recognized this time. Gunshots. 3 of them. Then 2 more. His feet stopped moving before his brain told them to. The hallway stretched ahead, 40 feet to the junction, then a left turn toward the staff quarters, then a right toward the back utility exit. He knew this building the way you know something you've walked through 1,000 times without ever needing to run it. Now he needed to run it and suddenly every measurement felt wrong. He moved left. Kept close to the wall the way someone had told him once, years ago. Keep the wall at your shoulder, it cuts your exposure in half. He hadn't thought about that in a long time. The shouting got louder. A door burst open ahead of him. Security man, earpiece, hand on his chest, not seeing Nix until they were 3 feet apart. The man looked at him and said one word. Back. Go back. Then moved past. Nix didn't go back. He moved to the junction. pressed flat against the corner. Looked. For men he didn't recognize were in the main corridor. Moving fast. Organized. Not lost searching. The kind of people who had walked the map of this estate before tonight. One of them had his face toward the far hallway, and Nick saw the angle of his body and knew, in the specific way that fear teaches you things you didn't know you knew, that in about 8 seconds that man was going to turn this direction. Nix pulled back. Nowhere to go from here. The supply room was behind him. Locked, and he'd left the key inside. Staff exit was past the junction, and getting to it meant crossing in front of 4 men who were definitely armed and definitely not here for conversation. He pressed his back against the wall. His hands were open at his sides. His breathing was going fast and shallow, and he needed it to slow, and it wouldn't. And in that exact moment, in the specific silence between one shot and the next, between one breath and the one that might not come, he understood something. He understood it not the way you understand words. The way you understand a room when the lights go out. Caesar had been between him and that hallway for 3 days. Every time someone came down a corridor, the dog had been there first. Not aggressive, just present, just positioned. Between Nix and whatever was coming from the other direction, every single time, without Nix ever asking, without Nix ever noticing enough to ask. That wasn't attachment. That was guarding. The footsteps at the junction got louder. Nix's back was flat against the wall, and he had 6 feet of open space between him and the nearest door, and no dog beside him, and no plan, and the realization sitting in his chest like a coal going cold. He hadn't been watched. He'd been protected. And he had sent it away. He didn't get caught. He didn't know how. Luck or timing, or the specific grace that shows up sometimes when everything else has run out. The men at the junction moved toward the east wing. Nix moved the other direction. He found the service door at the back of the utility corridor and pushed through it into the side yard. Cold air hitting him hard, and stood in the dark outside the estate wall with his hands on his knees and his chest heaving. The alarms were still running inside. He could hear glass somewhere. Shouting. One more shot farther away this time. He straightened up. And then did something that had no logical defense. He went back toward the building. Not the main entrance. The perimeter. The long stretch of stone wall that ran the south edge of the estate grounds, past the garden beds that nobody used in winter, past the utility shed, toward the back corner where the wall met the iron fence and there was a gap. Barely a gap, more of an agreement between 2 pieces of infrastructure that had stopped touching. Wide enough for a man to squeeze through if he needed to. Wide enough for a large dog to pass. He didn't let himself think about why he was doing this. Thinking about it would slow him down, and he didn't have that kind of time. He called out. Low. 1 word. Caesar. Nothing. He moved along the wall. Wet grass under his shoes. The lights on the upper floors of the estate were flickering, power fluctuation, which meant someone had hit the generator panel, which meant this wasn't random. Caesar. Still nothing. He made the corner. And stopped. There was blood on the ground. Not a pool, a trail. Dark and uneven, moving away from the base of the wall, heading into the narrow strip of overgrowth between the fence line and the tree row. He stared at it for a moment. Just stared. Then followed it. The overgrowth was dense here. Nobody maintained this strip. It sat between the formal grounds and the boundary fence, and it belonged to nothing, which meant it was left alone. Branches caught his uniform. Something thorned pulled across the back of his hand, and he felt the sting but kept moving. The trail went 15 feet, then stopped. He pushed through the last section of brush, and found Caesar, lying on one side, left flank rising and falling. Slow. Too slow. One front leg extended, the other tucked close. A dark stain spreading from somewhere along the ribs that Nix didn't look at directly yet, because if he looked at it directly he would stop moving, and he couldn't stop moving right now. He dropped to his knees. His hands went to Caesar's neck first. pulse there, running fast and thin but there. He moved his hands down, pressed gently along the ribs, finding it, the source of the blood, a cut. Not a bullet wound, something else, something jagged, like Caesar had gone through glass or a fence edge or both. Fixable. The word came up from somewhere quiet inside him. Fixable if treated. Fixable if not left here. Fixable. He put his hand flat on Caesar's side. The dog's breathing shifted. The amber eyes opened, found Nyx's face, and stayed there. Nyx's throat closed. He pressed his lips together hard, breathed through his nose, ran his hands down the dog's body, checking for anything else, anything he missed, finding nothing beyond the one wound, which was bad enough but not. Then Caesar moved his head, slow, deliberate, the same way he did everything, and touched his nose to something behind him. Nyx looked. A puppy, black, tiny, curled against the base of a tree root, shaking but alive, eyes open, looking at Nyx with an expression that had no right to carry that much weight in something that small. Not the same puppy from the kitchen, different one. Nyx looked at Caesar. Caesar looked at him. The blood trail led from the estate wall to this spot in a straight line. Caesar had been injured somewhere on the estate grounds, and instead of going still, instead of lying down where it fell, it had carried this puppy out here first. The footsteps were coming from the north side of the fence. Nyx heard them and didn't move. He was on his knees in the dark, one hand pressed flat against Caesar's ribs, applying pressure the way he'd learned to. Not from training, just from the specific memory of needing to and doing it anyway. The puppy was tucked against his left knee. It had stopped shaking. He didn't know if that was better or worse, and he didn't have time to figure it out. The footsteps got closer. 2 sets. Moving with purpose. He looked at Caesar. The amber eyes were open. Still. No panic in them, which was the only reason Nyx's didn't flood either. He moved, gathered the puppy with one arm, pressed it against his chest, kept his other hand on Caesar's side. Signaled. He didn't know if Caesar knew hand signals, he'd never given them. But he pressed his palm down flat and low anyway because it was the only language he had. Caesar stayed down. The footsteps passed the north fence line. Slowed. Paused. Nyx held his breath. Kept still. 40 seconds. The footsteps moved again. Going east. Getting smaller. He let the breath out. His hand was shaking against Caesar's ribs. He felt it. Couldn't stop it. Just let it shake and kept the pressure on. That matters. What happened next? Pay attention to this part. He looked at the wound. Properly now, in the low gray light that came through the tree cover from the estate's upper floors. It was long. Tear, not a puncture. Caesar had gone through the iron fence. Nyx could see now where the bottom rail was bent outward. Forced, like something large had pushed through it fast and hard. Going through, not just past. Caesar had pushed through that fence to get out here. To bring the puppy somewhere safe. While injured, Nyx looked at the dog and felt something break open in his chest that he didn't have a word for and didn't try to name. He just felt it. Let it be there. Didn't push it down and didn't make it smaller. "I'm not leaving you," he said. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just the truth. Offered the way you offer the truth when there's nothing else left to offer. Caesar's ear moved toward his voice. The puppy made a sound against Nyx's chest. Small, searching. The sound of something deciding it's safe enough to need something. He stripped off the outer layer of his uniform jacket. Pressed it to Caesar's side. Secured it with pressure from his forearm so his hands were free. Pulled his phone. It had survived somehow. And pulled up the one number he'd never intended to use. He'd gotten it months ago. From a staff list he wasn't supposed to have. He'd stored it anyway because 11 months in a place like this teaches you to collect the things you hope you never need. He pressed call. It rang once. Darien picked up. No greeting, just silence on the line. The specific kind that meant he was already listening. South perimeter, Nick said. Behind the iron fence. Caesar is down. Wound on the left flank. Not a bullet, a tear. He's stable. He needs a vet, not a hospital. Silence. Then, are you hurt? Not a question. An assessment. No, Nick said. Another silence. Shorter. Stay there. The line went dead. Nick set the phone down in the wet grass. Adjusted his forearm against Caesar's side. The dog's breathing had steadied. Still too slow, but steadier. The puppy had gone quiet against his chest. He could feel both of them. One heartbeat slow and heavy, one fast and faint, and his own somewhere between the two. He thought about the kitchen. 3 days ago and about 1,000 years ago. A dog that walked in out of a storm carrying a lifeless puppy and dropped it at the feet of the one person in the building who had no power and no standing and no reason to be chosen. He thought about pushing it away. He thought about what it had cost both of them. I was wrong, he said. Not an apology exactly. More like an accounting. A person standing still long enough to add up what they did and what it meant. Caesar's ear turned toward him again. The amber eyes held. Nix put his free hand on the dog's neck. Just rested it there. Warm fur under his palm. Wet from the ground. Matted in places, and he didn't care. He stayed. They came over the south wall in under 8 minutes. 2 men with a medical kit. A third with a stretcher, the kind used for large animals, built flat and low to the ground. No wasted movement. No noise beyond what was necessary. Nix recognized one of them as part of Darien's inner security, though he didn't know the man's name. He stepped back and let them work. The vet arrived 4 minutes after that. A woman, sharp-eyed, moving with the specific calm of someone who had done hard things in the dark before and would again. She assessed the wound in under 30 seconds, gave 2 quiet instructions to the men beside her, and began. Nix stood at the edge of the overgrowth with the puppy still pressed against his chest. He watched them work and did not get in the way. At some point, he couldn't have said exactly when, he became aware of Darien standing beside him. Not close enough to touch. Just present. The same way Caesar had been present for 3 days. Not intrusive. Just there. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The vet worked. The men held the lamp steady. Caesar's breathing evened out by degrees. Nix tracked it without meaning to, measuring each rise and fall of the dog's chest against the one before it, looking for the trend, finding it going in the right direction, and letting himself believe it. When it was done. When the wound was cleaned and closed and wrapped and Caesar had been lifted onto the stretcher with more care than Nix had expected from men built the way those men were built. Darien finally spoke. You pushed away what could have saved you. Flat. Even. No accusation in it. Just the fact, stated the way facts deserve to be stated. Nix looked down at the puppy in his arms. I didn't think I deserved it, he said. Darien said nothing for a moment. Then, that's the most dangerous mistake. Nix looked at him. Not trusting the wrong thing, Darien said. Rejecting the right one. The estate was quieter now. The alarms had stopped somewhere in the last 20 minutes. Nix hadn't noticed the exact moment, which meant the shift had been gradual, which meant things were being handled. The attack was over. Whatever Roth and the security team had dealt with, they had dealt with it. The estate was settling back into itself the way big quiet things always settled. Slowly, heavily, with the particular silence of aftermath. The men with the stretcher began moving toward the south gate. Nix fell in beside them without being told. The puppy shifted against his chest, nosed at the collar of his jacket, found a warm spot and stayed there. Caesar's eyes were open on the stretcher. They found Nix's face the same way they always found it. Immediately, directly, like there was nothing else in the field of vision worth settling on. Nix held the look. Didn't look away, because this time he understood what it meant. Not selection, not something being done to him, not a target on his back or a game he'd wandered into. Something simpler and older and harder to accept than any of those things. The specific discomfort of being seen clearly by something that had no reason to lie to you. He had spent 11 months in this estate making himself invisible. And something with amber eyes and a barrel chest and 7 years of conditioning had walked into a kitchen at 1 in the morning and looked straight at him anyway. He stopped making himself invisible now. Just stopped. Darien walked beside him the last 50 feet to the south gate and said nothing else. He didn't need to. At the gate, just before they passed through, Nix looked back once. At the bent iron fence. At the blood trail that had led him here. At the tree root where the puppy had been waiting in the dark, shaking, alone. He looked at all of it. Then he walked through the gate, carrying both. He didn't wait for permission to go back. He just went. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't the charge. It's the return. And if this story moved something in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Every story on this channel is built to remind you of something real. Drop a comment and tell me, what's the one thing you've pushed away that you wish you'd let stay? Let's talk. Because the best stories aren't just watched. They're felt, shared, and carried forward. And this one is just getting started.